Buenos días a todos, encantados de que estéis aquí en esta última presentación que tenemos de verano, presentación sobre nuclear power and secure energy transition. We are going to make this to switch to English because our colleague from the International Energy Agency is going to make this presentation in English. Thank you very much, Keith, for coming here, for attending this presentation. It's a pleasure of having you here for that. This is the first time that Keith Everhart is coming here to introduce and to present this study, Nuclear Power and Secure Energy Transition, from today's challenges to tomorrow's clean energy system. This is not the first time that the IEA is making this kind of report about the nuclear energy. I remember in the 2019 it was published another one, and we have presented here this report too. And this is about the role of nuclear. It's a very interesting report. I think that the four chapters they have are related to the role of nuclear industry, related to the difficulties to build, the construction, the costs, etc. It's a very interesting chapter about this. I recommended you to follow this presentation, and the chapter related to SMR, the small and medium reactor. This is a good thing. Well, I think the role of the nuclear energy in the near future is going to introduce by then, after 1973, the first crisis. It will start, both have started at that time a very strong program of construction of the nuclear power station. Now we are seeing a different way right now. And this is one of the issues that now are discussing the IEA is reporting that very accuracy. I think this publication you can download for free from the EIA website. We are going to have this presentation. After this, you will have the opportunity to ask questions to our guests through this Zoom Q&A questions. You can send that to us in Spanish or in English, and we will translate that to Keith Everhart. Keith is an American. He works for the EIA since July 2019, more or less just before the pandemic came. And he has worked many years in the Federal Regulatory Commission in the States. He is a specialist about all related to this area of regulation and all of this. I'll give the floor to him to present and to introduce himself. Keith, thank you very much. Once again, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Arcadio, for those opening remarks. And thanks to everyone here for joining today. Let me start by sharing my screen. See if this will work. Can everybody see that okay?
Yeah.
Great. So I'm pleased to have the opportunity to present the IEA's recently released report on the outlook for the nuclear sector, titled Nuclear Power and Secure Energy Transitions from Today's Challenges to Tomorrow's Clean Energy System. Now, in this publication, the IEA took a comprehensive look at the role nuclear energy plays today and can play in the future as we strive to build secure, sustainable, and affordable energy systems. Now, as Arcadio mentioned on this topic, we produced a report called Nuclear Power in a Clean Energy System in 2019. In that report, a key message was the critical need to extend the lifetimes of nuclear plants in advanced economies to make energy transitions as affordable and rapid as possible. Now, on that front, there has been good progress. About 10% of the nuclear capacity in the world has been granted lifetime extensions since the release of that report in 2019. Now, prior to 2019, we had not published a report dedicated to nuclear energy at the IEA for nearly 20 years. So why have we come back so soon on this topic? The IEA believes, looking at energy market trends and policy changes, that nuclear is set to make a comeback. Now, again, as Arcadio mentioned, it leads right into this point in the report, is that nuclear investment has historically been subject to a number of boom and bust cycles. In the decade following the 1973 oil shock, construction started on almost 170 gigawatts of nuclear power plants, with a majority of those built in Europe. These plants still represent 40% of today's nuclear capacity. Support for nuclear investment declined due to high cost and long construction times, unfavorable market environments, and in some countries, a lack of public confidence after accidents like Chernobyl and Fukushima. As well, the increased availability of oil by the end of the 1970s and discoveries of natural gas reserves, including shale, have reduced the appetite for nuclear investment, particularly in Europe and the United States. So why is today a potential turning point for nuclear energy? There are two specific reasons. The first is energy security. When we now find ourselves in the midst of the first truly global energy crisis as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Energy security is essential for the functioning of the modern economy and ultimately for political and social stability. To avoid the worst possible outcomes in this current energy crisis, we must look at all of the tools that we have available at our disposal. Now, just on Monday, the IEA's executive director, Fatih Birol, released a commentary outlining 5 immediate measures that should be taken to avoid a major gas crunch this winter. This includes encouraging consumer behavioral changes, boosting energy efficiency, accelerating renewables, and on a temporary basis, increasing the use of fossil fuels like coal and oil. The need for a diverse mix of non-fossil domestic energy resources is becoming all the more clear. In this light, nuclear energy can play a significant role, and a number of countries have taken action to boost the use of both existing and potential for new nuclear power. Belgium and Korea have recently scaled back plans to phase out existing nuclear plants. In the United States, new programs and billions in funding will support lifetime extensions and new advanced reactors. France plans to build 6 new large reactors starting in 2028, with the option to build 8 more by 2050. Poland has set forth an ambitious investment program in both large-scale and small reactors. The UK includes plans for 8 new large reactors and faster restarts of reactors in Japan that have already received safety approvals could free up liquefied natural gas for use in other markets. The second reason for doing this report is the climate crisis. Countries around the world have increased their commitment to reaching net zero. Renewables would provide the dominant share of electricity in net zero systems. And the higher the shares would become, the higher value of other low carbon and dispatchable power generation resources there would be. Nuclear today makes up about 10% of global electricity generation. This share has declined from 18% in the late 1990s, but nuclear is still the second largest source of low emissions electricity after hydroelectricity and the leading source in advanced economies. In 2020, nuclear electricity still exceeded the total combined contribution of wind and solar PV generation worldwide. Nuclear power contributes to both energy security and climate goals by avoiding about 1.5 gigatons of global emissions annually. Nuclear energy could play an important role in ensuring that the energy sector's journey to net zero emissions is rapid and secure. Widespread electrification of end uses is a critical element of achieving net zero emissions. Global electricity demand would grow 2.5 times over the next 3 decades. Low emissions electricity generation would need to increase to supply such a rapid demand growth, increasing 7-fold from 2020 to 2050. New low emissions power capacity needs to quadruple to 800 gigawatts per year in the 2020s and 1,200 gigawatts per year in the 2030s. Emissions from heat production, which is provided predominantly from unabated fossil fuels today, should be reduced. Low emissions hydrogen needs to grow fast, with nuclear as a possible option to supply it. And finally, we need new technologies and innovation, including advanced nuclear. At the same time, we must recognize the challenges that have faced the industry. Rising construction costs and lead times have plagued the nuclear industry in many countries in recent years. Recent nuclear power projects in Europe and the United States have experienced considerable delays and cost overruns. This has not always been the case for nuclear construction, as the nuclear reactors in operation around the world today took an average of 7 years to build. While 15 of those took 15 years or more, 152 were built in 5 years or less. Advanced economies have lost market leadership in nuclear. Although advanced economies have nearly 70% of global nuclear capacity, this fleet is aging, as shown on the chart at the beginning, with an average of 36 years in North America and 38 years in Europe. On the other hand, construction activities have picked up substantially in emerging market and developing economies, particularly China, which has completed the most new nuclear capacity in each of the last 9 years. Of the 31 reactors that commenced construction since the beginning of 2017, 27 of these are either of Russian design, 17 of those, or Chinese design, 10, with 2 of European design under construction in the United Kingdom and 2 Korean designed units in Korea. Russia dominates the export market. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has raised questions about the export prospects for Russian-built nuclear plants. Recently, Finland has canceled a contract for a new reactor with Rosatom, signed in 2013, citing delays and increased risks due to the war in Ukraine. Nuclear power plays a significant role in a secure global pathway to net zero. Nuclear power doubles from 413 gigawatts in 2022 to 812 gigawatts in 2050 in our net zero emissions scenario. Annual nuclear capacity additions reach 27 gigawatts per year in the 2030s, higher than any decade before. Even so, the global share of nuclear in total generation falls slightly to 8% from 10% today. Emerging market and developing economies account for more than 90% of global growth, with China set to become the leading nuclear power producer before 2030. Advanced economies collectively see a 10% increase in nuclear, as retirements are offset by new plants, mainly in the United States, France, the United Kingdom, and Canada. But the industry has to deliver projects on time and on budget to fulfill its role. As mentioned in the slide previous, we'd seen that current projects, recently completed or projects still under construction, have seen costs increase from an estimated of around $2,500 to $4,000 per kilowatt to around $9,000 per kilowatt in the final analysis. New nuclear projects in advanced economies need to be reduced to around $5,000 per kilowatt by 2030, so a 40% reduction below the reported cost of recent projects. There are some proven methods to reduce costs, including finalizing design before starting construction, staying with the same design for subsequent units, and building multiple units at the same site. Stable regulatory frameworks throughout construction would also help to avoid delays. The resurgence of nuclear power in the net zero emissions scenario entails a massive increase in investment in the coming decades to build new nuclear reactors and extend the operational lifetime of existing ones. Global investment in nuclear surges to over $100 billion in the first half of the 2030s in the net zero emissions scenario, over 3 times the average of the 2010s. Nuclear investment declines after 2035, however, as the power sector nears full decarbonization. While a significant step up, investment in nuclear power accounts for less than 10% of the total for low emission sources of electricity to 2050, with renewables dominating the market and renewable investment reaching $1.3 trillion per year in the 2030s. The focus on nuclear investment in the NZE, net zero, shifts gradually from emerging economies to advanced economies. Over the period to 2050, advanced economies account for about half of the global nuclear investment at close to $50 billion per year, almost 4-fold the average of the 2010s. These countries' investment needs are high relative to their share of global capacity due to higher construction costs, plus the need to extend the lifetimes of existing reactors and to offset retirements. Extending nuclear plants' lifetimes is an indispensable part of a cost-effective path to net zero by 2050. About 260 gigawatts, or 63% of today's nuclear plants, are over 30 years old and nearing the end of their initial operating licenses. In the past 3 years, policy and regulatory approvals extended the lifetimes of plants representing about 10% of the worldwide nuclear fleet, with a total capacity of 50 gigawatts. Despite this, the nuclear fleet operating in advanced economies could still shrink by 1/3 by 2030 without granting further extensions, as there are pending policy and regulatory decisions on reactors with a total capacity of almost 60 gigawatts. In the NZE, the existing fleet of nuclear reactors provides a stronger foundation on which to build transitions. Further lifetime extensions are a critical part of the cost-effective pathway, as, despite requiring substantial investment, they have a levelized cost of electricity generally below US $40 per megawatt hour, making them competitive even with solar and wind in most regions. Less nuclear power would make net zero ambitions harder, more expensive, and more risky. The low nuclear case of the NZE considers the impact of failing to accelerate nuclear construction and extend lifetimes, with nuclear share of total generation declining from 10% in 2020 to 3% in 2050, which compares with 8% in the NZE. Solar and wind would need to fill the gap, placing more pressure on these technologies and pushing the frontiers of integrating high shares of variable renewables. To maintain electricity security, far more battery storage and carbon capture technologies are needed. The implications of less nuclear would be, first, higher overall costs. Higher investment and fuel costs mean that consumers would pay an extra $20 billion per year over the next 3 decades. Second is additional strain on clean energy supply chains. For every 1 gigawatt reduction in nuclear capacity in the low nuclear case, an additional 3.5 gigawatts of capacity from other sources is needed, with a greater call on critical minerals for both power generation technologies and grid infrastructure. Third is higher exposure to natural gas and coal market prices. Coal and gas prices would be more important for consumer electricity bills, removing a degree of shelter from market volatility that is offered in the NZE. On the flip side, an even larger role for nuclear could emerge if the industry can deliver lower costs than those estimated in the NZE. Nuclear competes directly with other low emissions dispatchable sources like hydropower, bioenergy, and fossil fuel plants equipped with CCUS. This market increases substantially in the NZE, reaching $1.1 trillion in the 2030s. If construction costs of nuclear power could fall to $2,000 to $3,000 per kilowatt, which equates to an LCOE of $40 to $80 per megawatt hour, including decommissioning and waste disposal, it would be possible to capture a higher share of this market. Low emissions hydrogen and heat, while much smaller markets, offer additional opportunities for nuclear power. The rapid expansion of low emissions hydrogen is a key pillar of the NZE. For nuclear to compete with blue and green hydrogen, investment costs would need to decrease to US $1,000 to $2,000 per kilowatt. There are also possibilities to co-generate heat from nuclear plants to replace district heating and other high temperature uses, though the potential scale for this market is limited. Nuclear and other dispatchable power sources complement renewables by providing critical services to electricity systems. The predominance of wind and solar in the power mix and the end of unabated fossil generation must be complemented by a diverse mix of dispatchable generation to provide stability, short-term flexibility, and adequate capacity during peak demand periods. For example, in our analysis of a carbon neutral power system in China, nuclear would provide only 10% of total electricity produced in 2060, but would supply almost half of the required amount of inertia, a key component of system flexibility. Wholesale markets should price these services to reflect their value. The need for system services such as flexibility, adequacy, and stability increases sharply as the share of variable renewables increases. Electricity markets should be designed to fully value these services and not just simply electricity production. In addition, robust carbon pricing regimes would encourage a more decarbonized energy system at lowest cost. Although carbon pricing has been introduced in the electricity and other sectors in many parts of the world, prices have often been too low to have a significant impact on investment decisions for new capacity. For example, the most recent auction for emissions allowances in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in the eastern United States cleared at $14 per ton in 2023. This is far below the IEA's estimate of $130 per ton required by 2030 in advanced economies in order to be compatible with net zero emissions. In the US, as a result of an expansion in variable renewable capacity and stagnating electricity demand, nuclear power plants have been coming under increasing financial pressure in some states. Since 2013, 12 nuclear power plants have closed for financial reasons, and several others remain at risk of closure before the end of their estimated lifetimes. The IEA has modeled the impact on profitability of different generating types based on implementing robust carbon and scarcity pricing, or incorporating reserves into the price of energy. In the absence of a carbon price or scarcity pricing, none of the main generating types in this model of China would earn enough revenue through the energy market to support new investment. Introducing scarcity pricing and assuming a US dollar 100 per ton of CO2 increases substantially the profitability of all low emissions generating types, making the operation and construction of new capacity more financially attractive. Even still, government involvement will be needed to finance new investment. Nuclear projects have long relied on state ownership or a regulated monopoly structure to guarantee revenues and reduce risk to investors, because there is rarely sufficient private sector finance for such capital-intensive and long-lived assets, particularly those exposed to significant policy risk. Innovative financing mechanisms, such as the recently approved regulated asset-based model by the United Kingdom, can help to secure adequate financing while assigning risks to those best situated to accept it. Small modular reactors, or SMRs, are among the most promising technologies. They are generally defined as advanced nuclear reactors with a capacity of less than 300 megawatts, less than 1/3 of an average large-scale reactor. Momentum is building behind SMRs with a burst of recent activity. At the start of 2022, there were 3 SMRs in operation, 3 under construction, and over 60 under development. Being smaller can help SMRs fit in. Lower capital costs, inherent safety and waste management attributes, and reduced project risks may improve social acceptance and attract private investment for research and development, demonstration, and demonstration. SMRs could also reuse the sites of retired fossil fuel power plants, taking advantage of existing transmission, cooling water, and skilled workforces. Other opportunities include co-location with industry to provide electricity, heat, and hydrogen production. SMRs have strong political and institutional support, but policy and regulatory reforms are needed to stimulate investment. There are substantial grants in the United States and increased support in Canada, the United Kingdom, and France. This support makes it possible to attract private investors, bringing new players and new supply chains to the nuclear industry. Adapting and streamlining licensing and regulatory frameworks to take SMR attributes into account is key. International harmonization of licensing and definitions are essential to developing a global market. The report makes some conclusions and policy recommendations to enable nuclear power to fulfill its role in a decarbonized power system. We suggest that plant lifetimes are extended so that they can continue to operate for as long as safely possible. We suggest that systems design electricity markets to ensure that nuclear power plants are compensated in a competitive and non-discriminatory manner for the avoidance of emissions and the services they provide to maintain electricity security, including capacity availability and stability. We encourage that financing frameworks are set up to mobilize capital for new plants at an acceptable cost and with fair sharing of risks between stakeholders, including investors and consumers. We think that promoting efficient and effective safety regulation is key. We need to ensure that safety regulators have the resources and skills to undertake timely reviews of new projects and designs, develop harmonized safety criteria for new designs, and engage with potential developers and the public to ensure that licensing requirements are clearly communicated. We need solutions on waste disposal. We need to involve citizens in prioritizing approval and construction of high-level waste disposal facilities in countries that do not yet have them. We need to accelerate the development and deployment of small modular reactors, identifying opportunities where SMRs could be a cost-effective, low-emission source of electricity, heat, and hydrogen. We need to support investment in demonstration projects and develop supply chains. Finally, we need to reevaluate plans according to performance. There is a big challenge ahead for the nuclear industry to be able to deliver safe projects on time and on budget. And we need to make long-term support contingent on being able to deliver as such. Thank you. That's the conclusion of my presentation, and I look forward to.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Keith, for your outstanding presentation. It's very interesting to see the role that the nuclear energy could have in the future in this decarbonization and net zero. There are some figures very shocking, these figures with the cost overruns and delays in the Western new construction groups, or for instance, just 4 out of 31 was Western technology, just Chinese or Russian are the 27. Okay, this is the time for organization, and I think these figures or something like this could make an approach to the question people send to us. Thank you very much, Keith, once again, and I give the floor to Pablo to give you this question we have received.
Thank you, Arcadio. Thank you very much, Keith, for your presentation. The first 2 questions we have are concerning the comments Arcadio made. One of them having to do with the delays and cost overruns in construction in new nuclear reactors. And they're asking you, what are the main reasons for this delay and to have more cost than what it was initially in the budgets?
I think we found basically two major sources of the cost overruns and the delays. First are the changing safety parameters required by regulators in response, particularly to what happened in Fukushima. So we have a number of these plants that were started prior to 2011 when the Fukushima event occurred. And we did have some changes in safety regulation and requirements to improve, and respond to the deficiencies in safety that led to the event in Fukushima, which did have an impact. However, I think that as important and kind of as a factor driving the cost increase and delays are the lack of supply chain for these first of a kind reactors. We're having new technology. We have lost a lot of the expertise in the supply chain for parts, for all the things that go into the building of the plant. So when those supply chains that were quite active in the 70s and 80s essentially dry up and you lose that expertise, picking that up again after so many years and losing using valuable manpower and expertise from those supply chains, it takes time to build those back up, and we haven't seen basically the suppliers being able to deliver on those promises in terms of, we do understand that first of a kind reactors always have higher costs than subsequent, and there is some forms of learning by doing, and I think the supply chain issue rears its head in that respect, because you need to essentially have, and this is across a lot of industries, and I think that's, I just make a point about SMRs in this context, in that there's an argument that goes to the effect that SMRs would exhibit a lot higher levels of learning by doing and cost reductions in nth of a kind, which is what you say after you get to so many of those being built, that you reduce the cost by so much, because it's more akin to other types of industries like building a car or building an airplane, where you do have enough repetition over time, and if you have these SMRs, you have small reactors, and so you can build more of them, which potentially would allow you to see a bigger reduction in cost in the future. That being said, I think yes, the difference, these sort of things should have been foreseen from the start, and at least in terms of the supply chain dynamics and all these things about the first of a kind type of reactors. And there's still I think an optimism bias in terms of selling the reactor to the prospective buyer and being promising things that you may not be able to deliver.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Keith. The other question has to do with the 27 out of 31 nuclear reactors that you mentioned that are starting construction, that are either Russian or Chinese design. And they're asking you if that could cause any problem in terms of building new reactors.
Well, certainly, we had given the example of Finland that had signed a contract for a Russian design in 2013 that they've now canceled. I don't know if it's particularly an issue with respect to the availability of competing designs. I think, obviously the sale of the technology from Russia or China to those countries perhaps would come with political considerations and strings attached. If I guess if that's the point of the question, I think it's certainly possible. We may see, hopefully, sort of healthy competition in terms of firms in the West that are able to develop their designs and their costs to be able to compete more directly in terms of the actual cost per kilowatt in terms of construction. But I think the political consideration of that. I mean, I would not want to weigh in so much in terms of what that really means. I think where the way we presented it in the report is simply as a challenge. I think mainly to the firms in the Europe and the United States that and perhaps Korea is another alternative for countries that are looking for to import nuclear technology, and the new government there has stated a goal of selling I think 10 plants for export by 2030. So Korea is more fully committed, I think, to both domestically and as an exporter of nuclear technology. So we need to, I think, be open to seeing the technology being able to be exported and at a reasonable cost.
Thank you very much, Keith. Another question, they ask you, what is the delivery time of the SMRs, for example, one of 100 megabytes? And the person who is asking the question says that he's not sure if this time is compatible with the time for the energy transition. And there was also another question dealing with costs of SMR. I don't know if you've made this calculation in your report.
That was an interesting question. I think what we see in terms of first commercially viable SMRs delivered would be in the early 2030s. We've talked to a number of developers in the SMR landscape, and their consensus is that basically first commercial plants are around that time frame with sort of wide scale availability at later 2030s time frame. And I think you're absolutely right in that we see the sort of window of opportunity for the major window of opportunity for decarbonization. As I mentioned, I think to reach net zero by 2050, we need to fully decarbonize the electricity sector first. We need to electrify a lot of end uses, and we need to decarbonize those. And so what happens is that we need to, especially in advanced economies, do this essentially by 2035. And in that respect, SMRs would not necessarily be able to play a very large role in that time frame. I think we could see, there's still opportunities beyond 2035 as, the annual investment needs decrease after that, but they don't fully disappear. And we could also see, other developments in terms of new demand cases for electricity, and if the costs, like you mentioned, I think, and to answer the question on costs, I think we don't necessarily delineate between the costs of the large scale and SMR in the model over the sort of long term. So we expect perhaps that the SMR and large-scale reactor costs would converge at some point. And I think if you look at our net zero scenario, I think we have costs at 2050 around 4,500 US dollars per kilowatt in the US, about the same in the EU, and about 2,500 in China and other emerging markets. So we do essentially expect that there will be a convergence there that would be possible in a longer term scale. I think in the short term, we've noticed that plants that are being built with government support are certainly looking at much higher costs compared to the output that we're seeing and that they expect to deliver. So perhaps in terms of like a 4-to-1 ratio between the costs and the value of the energy. So obviously that ratio needs to come down in order for those to become more competitive. But I think we're looking at a 15 to 20 year scale in terms of how that may occur.
Thank you very much, Keith. Another question dealing with cost. Have you estimated the cost of expansion of already built nuclear plants?
We estimate that. Okay, so is this? You're saying that to increase the output of a current nuclear plant, or
to expand its lifetime?
Lifetime extension.
Yeah.
So our estimate of lifetime extension is about 40. Adds about 40. Would be about $40 US per megawatt hour. I think that's around $1,000 to $2,000 per kilowatt in terms of upfront investment cost. So, half of basically what a new plant would cost if it were like a Russian or a Korean design or a Chinese design. But we're talking about higher costs, in Europe and the United States.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Keith. They're asking you also on waste management in your report, if you have an approach to waste management, new technologies, something concerning the recycling. Is this something covered in the report?
We mentioned the need for long-term solutions to waste disposal, and selecting sites for long-term waste management. We don't take a position on whether we support recycling or repurposing of the nuclear fuel or simply storing it. I think that's kind of maybe out of our level of expertise on that. But we are aware that there is a lack of long-term storage, decisions being made in particularly in advanced economies. We note that Finland has started building one. I think we're potentially close in France and in Sweden, and then maybe eventually in the United States.
Thank you very much, Keith. And last question that we have, out of the 10% of capacity that has been granted expansion that you mentioned, the reactors in construction, would you say there are new initiatives to use nuclear energy and building additional plants since the war in Ukraine started? Is it getting accelerated? How do you see this?
I think it has. I think what we've seen, for example, we had an election in Korea where the winning party, the president, ran on support for restarting construction at 2 nuclear plants and expanding nuclear going forward, and like I mentioned, exporting their nuclear technology. We've had decisions in Belgium to reverse their phase out. We've had we've also had the situation in Japan, where I think also the president there has announced support for restarting those plants that are for safety reasons available to restart. They have gone through the process to get their license to restart. I think they're supporting those, but in Japan, I think it's more that the final determination is made by local communities, but it does have the support of the national government. We've seen in France, for example, they've announced plans for new nuclear construction. The UK as well, and so and I mentioned the support in the US, particularly on SMRs, as well as I believe it's about a $6 billion program for essentially those plants that I mentioned that were subject to economic pressure in the US due to the factors that I mentioned, the sort of lack of robust carbon pricing and other system services that in a sort of ideal market, nuclear could capture a lot of that value, but are not being able to due to the market structure in many parts of the US. But the current administration has announced a plan for this $6 billion pot of money that could go to extending the economic lifetime of nuclear plants there. So I think we've seen it across a wide variety of jurisdictions that are currently considering nuclear, that the like you say, there's more momentum to scaling up.
Thank you very much, Keith. That's it for the questions. So I give the word to Arcadio.
Okay, thank you very much, Keith, for attending this presentation. It was a pleasure of having you here. It won't be the last time you came here. Maybe next time will be face to face. And thank you very much. I'm going to applaud him. And buenos días para todos. Thank you very much, Keith.
Thank you for having me, Arcadio. Thanks everyone for
joining. See you next time here.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.